Good morning, everyone. Thank you for giving us part of your Sunday. Um, my name is Sonam. I've met a handful of you during interviews or throughout this process, but it's nice to formally see you all on the Zoom call. Today, we're just going to be going through a training to get you all up to speed about peer support, peer-to-peer, logistics, things of that sort. And so just wanted to give you guys a warm welcome and so glad that you're here. Pass it off back to Samantha.
Super. And our team definitely echoes the good mornings and the welcomes and the thank you for your Sunday, especially amidst midterms, end of the semester, and what has been for many a troubling start to the weekend in the national news cycle. Our team is myself, Samantha Liu. We've also got Pat Tang on the line. He's a program manager for Peers for Progress. And we also have Dr. Ed Fisher, who's a professor in the Department of Health Behavior. And so we'll be doing the training today, but we've been working closely with your peer-to-peer executive team in just like program development as well as training development for today. So we're super excited to get you going as the first, or as the next cohort, sorry, of peer responders. Just one way to get you all to do introductions. Could you all just share one way you've practiced self-care in the last week or so? We're going to touch on self-care a couple times throughout the training. And so I think being able to have this list might be helpful for you in the future. So if you all could just share one little thing you've done for yourself in the last week in the chat, that would be super cool. Seeing some physical health things, time outside, a lot of food, which is great. Exercise. This is good. Y'all remember these things as we move forward through the training. And we'll go ahead and go on. Today, we do have a lot of ground to cover, and we'll get a chance to converse with each other a little bit more as we go throughout the morning. So we'll start with some introductory information about peer support itself, as well as some skills that you may use and strategies as a peer responder. And then we'll have a break about midway through and come back and start with a role play. So you all will get to practice some of these skills and strategies that we commented on in the first half of the training. And then we'll hear from the peer-to-peer executive team about some program specifics with the program protocol and crisis response. And then we'll kind of zoom out to some big picture topics before we close for the day. And our goal is to get you out by 12:30 today. As we go into the training, I just wanted to set some group training agreements for us as a whole. Some ideas that I had first were to participate honestly and freely. Others include not freezing each other in time so that we can learn from each other. I would love for you all to extend the grace to grow throughout the training as well as beyond as you continue your experience as peer responders. And then also later on in the training, you'll have a chance to role play, and I'll ask you all to draw from your own personal experiences. So I do ask that you please share your experience in this training and the things that you learned, but please don't share other people's personal details. It's not necessary for people to know who said what, for example. Does anyone have an additional group training agreement they'd like to add to this list? You can send it in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and shout it out. Okay, I'm seeing no others right now, but you all as a group may come up with others as you continue on with your peer responder meetings and such. So with that, other housekeeping is just to feel free to please participate in the chat or during discussion times, just unmute yourself, or as you feel more comfortable, you can also raise your hand. We'll try to make sure we see everyone, but if we are missing, someone's comment, please help us draw attention to that. And then also we will be talking about things like crisis and suicide later, as well as racism and police brutality and other topics. And so if you all feel that you need to step away or turn your camera off during those times, please feel free to do that. However, if you're comfortable, I would love for you to share within your experience and response to some of those topics as we go on and have discussion or questions about them. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to Ed to get us started with introduction to peer support.
Thank you, Samantha. And I just want to say that I'm really delighted to be with you all this morning. The peer-to-peer program has been so wonderful in its development and its scope and its wisdom and the help it's provided over the last year and a half. And so it's really exciting to participate in training this new group of peer-to-peer supporters. I hope that what you're doing in this program will be very satisfying and rewarding to you. I sometimes think in recall, we go back to the moment that we began this or went to the first meeting of this group or that, and it's sort of stuck in our mind as a time when things changed or moved forward in an important way in our lives. And I'm hoping that maybe your entry into peer-to-peer, or perhaps even this training, that even many years from now, you may look back on this and say, hey, that was a really good thing that I did. And that moment was a good inflection point in my life and development. So if I can have the next slide. Just starting off, what is peer support? Peer support is a non-professional natural helper, pardon the jargon, who support their peers in managing their health and leading full, satisfying lives. So it's support their peers, support their friends, their neighbors, their roommates, their classmates in leading full, satisfying lives. Usually peer supporters share some identity or experience in a lot of areas in health. We may train people with diabetes to support other people with diabetes. In your case, many of the folks you will be working with, you'll share the fact that obviously you're both UNC students, but you may share other parts of your identity or activities on campus. One of the real neat things about peer-to-peer is it's providing students the opportunity to identify the peer that they think would be most pertinent to them. And so that sharing is an important part of peer support. Sometimes folks are concerned, as peer support, am I becoming a professional counselor? How hard is this, and what is my role? And we try to simplify things. We just think that a peer supporter, a good peer supporter, is like a friend with extra skills. Want to talk about both parts of that. You all know that a good friend is a very good thing to have. So being like a friend is not minimizing at all. Being a friend is really important and can be very powerful. And then it's like a friend with extra skills that we'll be sharing with you this morning for just putting people at ease, helping them work on problems, etc. And important that peer support can be implemented in a multitude of ways. Peer-to-peer has a very well-defined approach, which is really great, but peer support exists across campus and around the world in many ways. It exists among clubs and groups that are sharing activities, in teams. It may exist among fellow majors in a particular department. It can exist in all sorts of ways, in the corridors of the dorms, in the apartments that people rent together. So it's important to understand that peer support is not just a single program, but it's a broad approach and a broad shared activity among people. The next slide. So just want to talk about the basis of peer support in the fundamental role of social connections and support. Those of you who've taken an introductory psych course have probably seen the picture on the left. What it showed was that the little monkey, when it was not hungry, preferred the somewhat warm and comforting terry cloth covered surrogate mother over the wire mother with a milk bottle. And the psychologists who developed that study did it to demonstrate that what they called contact comfort, just being close, being held, being with others, being supported by others, if you will, is valuable in and of itself, that it's not secondary to a derivative of interest in food and safety, that it's valuable in and of itself. And that's really important for us to consider. What you're doing with peer support is based on this fundamental characteristic of all primates, certainly including human beings. There's also a raft of research showing that human beings are more effective and happier when they have someone they can talk to, who cares about them, who can help them when they need help. Again, friends with special skills. There's nothing magical, nothing terribly esoteric here. It's just being able to talk to folks, care about them, help them if you can. And not only is this fundamental in all of us, it's really important. The risk of death associated with lack of peer support or lack of social support, lack of contact, social isolation is greater than the risk associated with cigarette smoking. So we're talking here about something that's fundamental, that's important, that has wide-reaching and powerful impacts. And if we can learn to do peer support well, we can help lots of people, and you're part of that. Samantha, next. So I'm not going to go through this in any detail, but there's lots and lots of evidence that peer support can be helpful in all areas around the world, in various areas of health and mental health. I do want to focus a little bit on the fourth bullet and just highlight what's in many ways distinctive about peer support. Those who live in a dorm, have dealt with microaggressions, et cetera, who share experience with people that are needing help, have a tremendous advantage in creating familiarity, credibility, a sense of comradeship. And then the next bullet, just that a key component that we're going to come back to quite a bit in this session is just being there, listening, being empathic. Again, nothing all that complicated, but you all know how valuable it is to talk to somebody who really seems like they're listening to you and getting it. And we're also going to be talking about problem solving, which is a key part of lots of counseling. There's a lot of evidence that a lot of therapy really is based on good problem solving. It may seem mundane or pedestrian, but actually when people have a nagging problem that they're having trouble solving, whether it's with a family member or a colleague or a friend or a work situation, having somebody who can help them solve that can make a big difference. And so peers can be effective in both. That is both being there and listening and in problem solving. And that's in some respects the basis for the rest of this session. Next, Samantha. Won't belabor these. I said that the last slide and then I did, but we consider 5 key functions of peer support. They're very straightforward, but they turn out to be really helpful in thinking about what good peer support entails. Being there, shared experience we've talked about, assistance in daily management, helping people deal with the daily management of being a student, problem solving, social and emotional support we've talked about, linkage to clinical and community resources. You can be an important person for folks in helping them find resources on campus. UNC is blessed with many resources, but frequently students get lost, faculty and staff also, in trying to find their way among all the resources. And finally, ongoing support. A really important part of peer support is that it doesn't go away. And your program, as I understand it, is set up so that people can have just a single session with you, but can also request continuing contacts, which is a really important component. The next. So a little talk now about the nature of the role and peer responder ethics. Next, please. So guiding principles for the role and the ethics and sort of your comfort in being a peer supporter. First of all, your effectiveness does not come from being an expert. Nobody's expecting you to be an expert about mental health, an expert about counseling, an expert even about everything available on the UNC campus. You don't provide medical advice if somebody's concerned about whether they should be taking an anxiolytic or an antidepressant. You talk to them about going to CAPS or going to the health center for that. It's not therapy. You're not being trained to do elaborate therapies for people with complex mental health problems. But it is important to know that what you do can help with lots of mental health problems. If a sophomore has a history of a couple of episodes of troubling depression during high school, and all of a sudden they're having some stress in their major, and they're starting to feel like they're going into a tailspin, having a good chat with somebody who can help them feel understood, get calm, see the bigger picture, identify some strategies they might pursue. That can go a long way to helping somebody with that kind of a problem. And people are capable of solving their own problems if given the chance, sometimes with a little practical advice or help. So that's really important. The idea of peer support is not to lead people by the hand, but to facilitate their own problem solving, their own capacity, but also to give them some practical advice or help. Frequently, a question we don't ask enough, but a very valuable question is, how have you been able to solve these kinds of problems in the past? Next slide, please. So what you do, you talk with and listen to people, assist in problem solving, discuss follow-up and further contact. You can rally support among the caller's other support networks, and advise on and refer to appropriate resources. So you're making people feel heard, helping them with problem solving as you can, provide follow-up and let them know that you're available to them, help them rally support among their friends and other networks, and advise on appropriate resources. And frequently, as I mentioned, in the great variety of resources at UNC, that last one can be important. Next. So what's expected of peer responders? To be available, respectful of privacy, as in any relationship. There's not really special privacy issues in peer support. As with any relationship, you would be respectful of what your friends tell you, and respect individual difference, understand that not everybody's going to solve problems in the same way. That's a real important issue in counseling. Sometimes we tend to want somebody to solve a problem the way we solved it, but we have to help them find their own way. And be available as reasonable, but you don't have to be available 24/7 for the rest of your life. So again, not more than might be expected of a friend. If you had a good friend who was going through some rough sledding, you'd be perhaps a little bit more available than usual, but you wouldn't have to totally open your life to them. Recognize when issues are outside your comfort zone. Turn to others as necessary. We'll talk more about that. And there are periodic meetings of the peer responders, and those can be a really important source of both checking out what you're doing and getting support that you may need from time to time from your colleagues that you're doing okay with the work you're doing. And also can be a source of new insights and new skills. And again, we've mentioned it a couple of times, but that's because it's important that peer supporters, peer responders are friends with additional training. Next, Samantha. So this is the last slide before we move on, but I would like Toby and Sonam and Claire and Michelle to each just look at these for a minute and just share with us which of these best practices they may have found most helpful, or they might have been most surprised how helpful it turned out to be, or most important in their work over the last year or so. So Sonam, can you go first and then we'll pass it along?
Yeah, I think the one that sticks out to me most is meet people where they're at. I think a lot of peers who have reached out and calls that I've had aren't really ready to maybe take that next step to go talk to a professional resource or to go to CAPS yet, or things of that sort, or to talk to their parents about maybe it's an identity and things of that sort. So I think it's really important to just be there and present in the call and not think of an end goal. And I think that sometimes, all of us are trying to help and all of us want to make sure that we help, but that takes time. And I think that's been the most useful one for me to understand and internalize, especially when I'm on a call that's only for 45 minutes and don't even know if that peer will reach out again or not.
That's really great. And, all of you are very good at problem solving. That's where you are in life. But sometimes we have to put the reins on that and sort of let people be where they are before they're ready to begin solving their problems. So we'll talk more about that in the next part of the training. Toby? You can't just say, I agree with Sonam.
I can go next. I think for me was the acknowledge boundaries. I think for me, it's hard to separate sometimes our professional experiences with peer-to-peer and our personal life. And I think that when you set boundaries, it advocates for yourself, but also others, while we are supporting our own mental health as well.
That's great. Yeah. It's always important to recognize who we are and what we're doing and the different roles we play and not get them confused. Michelle, or can you go next?
Yeah, sure. So I think for me, the two biggest things has always been demonstrating empathy and building rapport and trust. I think a lot of the time when someone reaches out to peer-to-peer, they're a little bit hesitant about speaking about their problems or their situation with someone of a higher status. So they're a little bit iffy when they're talking about what they're going through. But I think really making sure to just sit back and listen to everything that they have to say and getting to know that person during that 1 hour conversation is really vital to giving them the support they need, and just demonstrating empathy, even though you haven't gone through the same exact thing as them, just letting them know that you understand that even though you haven't experienced it yourself, it's very understandable that they're feeling the way that they feel. Or yeah.
That's great. Yeah, sometimes just acknowledging I haven't experienced what you're experiencing is a way of oddly creating empathy, because you're recognizing the uniqueness of what they're experiencing. Claire, you want to finish us off?
Sure. Oh, excuse me. Little voice crack. I've had a sore throat. But the most important to me, I think, is showing sensitivity. I think when you're on a call, sometimes while problem solving and directing to resources and all of that is really great. At the same time, sometimes these peers and anyone struggling with mental health or just life stuff in general, sometimes they just need someone to validate what they're going through and be like, you know what, I hear you. And that sounds like it sucks, or that sounds really hard. And I'm sorry that's happening. And so showing that sensitivity and just letting them know that, I recognize that what you're going through is hard. And I'm sorry you're going through that. And I'd love to listen more about it, even if it's something you just want to talk about and there's nothing I can necessarily do to fix it.
So Thanks, Claire. That's great. Three of the four of you have emphasized things in the general area of being there for people, just receiving them, showing empathy, showing sensitivity, meeting with them where they are. And it's a perfect segue because that is what Pat Tang is going to talk about next.
Thanks, Ed. Perfect. So I'll be leading you all through this next section on being a more effective communicator, and being there is the first step of that. But to start off with, I just want to mention that we're doing this training on doing peer support, and we haven't necessarily addressed mental health in general as a continuum, as a spectrum. And Ed touched on that with when you're talking to students about what you might see as everyday stressors, day-to-day things, and all the way to maybe emergencies and really distressful sorts of situations, and peer support can really be helpful across that entire spectrum. But yeah, this is not a training on mental health, but that is kind of the perspective that we bring into peer support. So to start off this section, I just want to iterate that just by virtue of being selected as a peer responder, you have the qualities and skills to provide peer support. You're probably already very effective communicators, but we just want to hone in on a few key skills and help you practice them in this training before you start in your role, so you feel more comfortable. And you might find that as we go through these, you've already heard about some of the topics in the training. And we don't claim to have any sort of trade secret on these things. How to Win Friends and Influence Others was a very successful self-help book. It was written back in 1936. So a lot of these kind of communications principles are well established. And I think one of the great things about peer support training is that you'll learn to develop skills that will be applicable to the rest of your life, in your personal life and likely in your professional life as well. Next slide, please. So just to zoom out to a quick, big overview of the typical process of peer support. And this isn't set in stone. Some of these processes might overlap or be ongoing. But to start off with, you want to be there for folks and build rapport. After that, you'll typically be doing a lot of active listening and expressing empathy. And after that is when you start moving into problem solving. We'll talk about that after my section here. And in that early section, it's really kind of where you're assessing, understanding, hearing what the problem is before you move into helping them solve problems, find out other campus and community resources that they might plug into. And then after that, of course, following up and providing ongoing support if needed over time. So I'll focus in my section on just the first two, if you could click, Samantha, on these specific skills. Just a quick point on building rapport, which was mentioned earlier. I think one of the skills that's very useful in this area is strategic self-disclosure. So telling people very briefly about a similar experience that you've had, or just relating it to something. Maybe it's not exactly what they experienced, but sharing something about yourself, it can be really effective. So people like to hear that you've gone through a similar process. It builds that shared lived experience. That's important to trust. There was an article that was published just in October that found that a shared sense of reality plays an important role in social connections. And this is one of the things that helps new acquaintances feel like that they click with each other. So how do you establish that shared sense of reality, that you're seeing things from a similar point of view? That's kind of where we're starting off with. I also want to emphasize that these are the steps where these communication skills are emphasized, but each skill isn't restricted to just one particular step in this process. For example, empathy should be something that you're expressing through all of your interactions. And in this little box right here is, for some people, just having someone listen to them and express empathy could be all that they need. Maybe they don't need you to help them solve problems or go to other resources. They just want you to focus on this area, and they'll feel better at the end of your conversation. Next slide, please. So let's start off with one of the building blocks of peer support, where it all starts. The importance of being there for someone seeking support. And so before a supportive relationship is possible, you really need to establish this type of genuine connection. And from our research on peer support across the world, we found that being there for somebody is really valued as an important dimension of social support. It's not anything that she did or said, it's just knowing that they were there. And being there has a couple of meanings. First, it means that you're making yourself available to someone when they need another person to lean on. They can count on you to call or text back promptly, maybe within 24 hours when they need it. And when they're talking to you, they can rely on you having their full attention. It means you're not multitasking. I mean, if you're doing it virtually and you're on Zoom or something, you don't have something else on the screen, you don't have the TV on, you're fully there for when you're talking to them. And it means that they can count on you to have their back. I think that's really important. Second, it means that we don't have to put pressure on ourselves to know all the answers and have the perfect response to someone that's going to magically solve their problems or make them feel better. And it reminds us to just slow down, and we don't need to jump ahead to offering advice and taking action, which is with the problem solving steps later on. Next slide, please. So I do want to talk a little bit about active listening. These are skills that are commonly found in motivational interviewing, which is probably something you've heard of. And when we're doing peer support, we're often doing more listening than we're doing speaking. Active listening is listening with a conscious effort to understand the complete message being sent. That includes the content of the message as well as the emotions underlying the message. It's a way of speaking with empathy without judgment. And through active listening, we help people feel that like they're understood. You might understand somebody, but you have to use active listening to convey your understanding. A simple set of active listening techniques includes asking open-ended questions, paraphrasing, providing affirmations, using nonverbal cues, and using reflections to clarify and demonstrate understanding. On this slide, we're just focused on a couple of those. I just want to focus on using reflections for a minute, and we'll do a practice on this in a few minutes. But when we hear something that seems important to us, and we want to probe for more information, we can use reflections with phrases such as, sounds like you're saying, or let me make sure I understand. We don't want to assume that we understand. We want to confirm and convey our understanding. And lastly, before we move on, when we do active listening, we want to avoid argumentation and putting the other person on the defensive. So that means being aware of our own feelings, our own opinions without imposing them on the other person. And being mindful of what's not being said, right? What can't be said and what's underlying the message. So next slide. This is a quick tip sheet on simple ways of asking open-ended questions. These can't be answered with a simple yes or no. Tell me more is probably the most useful one out of all of those. I think that's a great one to fall back on if you can't think of something else. Just ask them to elaborate, and the other person will typically just start saying more and giving you more details. I will say and caution that responding to everything that a student says with an open-ended question can be really tiresome. You can quickly become one-dimensional if you're responding to everything with an open-ended question. These are skills found in motivational interviewing, quote unquote, but students don't want to feel like they're being interviewed when they're seeking support, right? If you're asking questions to them over and over again, it can really feel like they're just being interviewed. And I just want to reflect on one time I was participating in a support group, and the facilitator only asked open-ended questions. They didn't reflect, they didn't encourage, they didn't really express empathy or any of those other types of skills in active listening. They just kind of focused on asking open-ended questions. And I was like, this is so tiring. I'm just talking the entire time and answering these probes. So, it left me thinking, don't you have anything else to offer me besides just asking me questions? So that is a caution for this. So let's move on to a couple of quick exercises. Next slide. This is open to everybody. You can put your responses in the chat, or you can unmute yourself, raise your hand, whatever you'd like to respond to this. So just a simple vignette, and then we'll ask you for 1 or 2 open-ended questions that you might ask Samir. No right or wrong answers here. So Samir shares with you that he recently had a difficult breakup with his partner. He's been feeling lonely for the past few weeks and is having a hard time adjusting to being single again. So what are a couple of open-ended questions that you might ask Samir, who's calling you on Peer2Peer? And you can start off by expressing empathy and then asking an open-ended question. Do whatever you'd like. And for the open-ended questions, try not to skip ahead to trying to solve Samir's problem. Just focus on the emotions and the content that he's expressed to you. I'll leave this open for the executive team too, if you guys wanna kick us off.
I think one thing off the bat that I would ask is just asking him like how he's feeling. I think he might say that he's feeling lonely, but that might be something that maybe he might feel like he's expected to say, or maybe there might be more feelings that he maybe hasn't had time to process. So just kind of asking him how he really is feeling.
That's great. Yeah, just processing those feelings, right? Yeah, maybe asking a question about the relationship itself, right? Reflecting on that relationship.
And yeah, kind of going off that, trying to dig more into what aspects are difficult. Is he having a difficult time adjusting to? So just kind of getting more clarification, more understanding where he's at with it all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some great questions in the chat too. What is being single again feel like? That's great. What led to the breakup? Okay, now we're getting to the juicy bits. What parts of being single are difficult? Yeah. Claire, perfect. Expressing empathy. That sounds really hard. Sorry, you're going through a difficult breakup. Yeah. Would you like to talk about it more? Great one, Bobby. Yeah. Yeah, maybe they're not ready to talk about it. Would you like to talk about it? Just confirming that that's a conversation they want to get into. That's great. All right, great responses. Thanks, guys. All right, let's next slide. Let's go to another practice here. I think this one might be a little more challenging. Samantha. So let's practice doing some reflections here. Again, a short vignette, and then just asking folks to do the same, reflect on what you've heard. So the example is a student seeking support says the following to you. My roommate is a nightmare. She's so inconsiderate and selfish. Like seriously, I think she's eaten my food at least a couple of times. I'm already planning to room with someone else next year, but I don't know how I'm gonna get through this one. Looking ahead to 4 or 5 more months of living with this person. So when you're doing a reflection to summarize what you've heard, demonstrate your understanding, just remember reflections often start with sounds like, let me make sure I understand if I'm hearing you correctly. So you can start off with those. In your reflection, try to pick up on their emotions as well as the content. Yeah, give you all a moment to think of a reflection for this student. This might be one of those cases that you could start off with a strategic self-disclosure as well, if you want to talk about a similar experience or with a roommate that you've had, how you felt about it, see if that matches up to their feelings. Any takers on this one?
I can start off. I think I would say so it sounds like to me, correct me if I'm wrong, that you have a roommate that you're currently having some conflicts with. I want to ask, have you had any open conversations with them about some of the problems you're having? Have you talked openly about her eating your food? And have you tried to come to a negotiation or a compromise with her?
Great summary and reflection there. All the chat responses always come at once as people think and type them all in. Okay, great. It sounds like there's some personal space boundaries that have been crossed or you're not comfortable with. Perfect. That's exactly the problem. Thank you, Landon. Sounds like your roommate's behavior is frustrating for you, picking up on the emotions. How have you spoken with them? How have you managed your frustrations? Disrespecting your boundaries, creating uncomfortable space. Exactly. Sounds like you guys are having different living styles. Have you tried setting boundaries? Perfect. All right. Yeah, so do people feel like the sounds like is a pretty natural way of kind of responding to reflection? Yeah, I think that's a very, very easy one to pick up on. Sounds like you guys aren't very compatible. That's great. Cameron comes in with a self-disclosure. I've had someone who's done that in the past. It'd be great if you had an experience that was like, yeah, I had a terrible roommate like that once, and actually we ended up being great friends after that. Give them a little bit of hope for the rest of the semester. All right. Well, great. Yeah, just keep those exercises in mind. Keep those phrases in the back of your head, in your toolbox, and pull those out when you need to. I think we're off to a really great start. Let me pass it off to Samantha to talk more about problem solving, the next steps.
Yes. Awesome job, y'all. Everything in the chat and that you've been verbalizing sounds really great. Okay, so after you build rapport with someone and you listen to them vent, I know my next temptation is always to jump straight to problem solving. That is my brain, and I'm like, what are all the different options we can do? So I have to stop myself sometimes and kind of exercise some of these basic steps. So it all starts with a study that took place in Zimbabwe with a group of peer supporters who were grandmothers across a number of different villages throughout the country who were trained in many of the same skills that we're talking about now. And there are these designated benches in certain areas where someone could sit on the bench, and that was an indication that they wanted to talk to one of the grandmothers. And so if one of the grandmothers just happened to see someone sitting on the bench and pass by, they would sit down with them and have a conversation to talk about what's going on in their lives. And out of that, we noticed a really simple problem solving structure and framework, which might be helpful for you all as you are having your conversations with your peers. And so the first step is accepting and validating someone's feelings, using all the skills that Pat was just talking about and that you all practiced through those vignettes, just hearing someone out, perhaps showing empathy with them if you have some kind of similar shared experience. It could sound a little bit like the reflections that you all just practiced in the last slide, and just listening to them. The next step, which is really important, and it's kind of a break between steps 1 and 2, is seeing whether or not that person wants to change things or their behavior. You can do this by asking for permission to share advice with them or asking for permission to share suggestions. I think parallel to that, someone earlier with the example with Samir, their question was like, oh, do you want to keep talking about this? And so similarly, in this fashion, you might say to someone, well, do you want to think about how to solve this problem yet? Are you there yet? Or are you just wanting me to listen to you? Are you just ready to vent? So then after that, of course, it's just brainstorming ways to make their situation better together and finding those solutions collectively. And I know that it's really important to get at this break between steps 1 and 2, and to figure out if someone just wants to vent or if they are actually ready to go into problem solving mode. And so I want to ask you all if you have any examples from your life as to when someone might have rushed into problem solving and that may not have been the best feeling that gave you. Has anyone had that experience that they could share with the group, verbally or in the chat?
My mom does that sometimes, and I think it's just because she's my mom and she wants she doesn't want to see me struggling and stuff like that, but I kind of feel like I know that at the end of the day I'm going to do something about the problem no matter what. I'm already know I'm going to work on it. So getting that emotional support is where I struggle the most, or feeling validated in how I feel about a problem. So yeah, my mom will do that, and I know it's out of love, but I'm just
yeah,
please, I just need to get this feeling out right now. I'll be okay.
For sure, Gabby, thanks for sharing that. And I hear that. And, my friends jokingly always call me the mom of the friend group. And so I find myself doing that too. And I have to take a step back and remember, I'm just here as your friend, not as a caregiver or caretaker. And that's kind of a similar role that you all will have as peer responders. You're not, you're not filling someone else's role of being their mom, right? Yeah, it looks like Maddie and Tiosa have similar times when they're feeling frustration when someone isn't actually listening to them or validating their experience. So I am going to move us on. This, problem solving is, like Pat and Ed said earlier, you all are probably already very good at problem solving. Later on, we'll talk a little bit more about resources that you all have at hand that you can help people, identify and navigate them to. But a big part of what you're doing is just giving someone the space to talk and to listen. And so make sure that you just remember as you move forward to give yourself a pause and to give your peer a pause to consider, do they actually want to move on to problem solving, or are they just here to talk to you and to vent whatever their issue is at the moment? So with that, we're going to have a chance to practice all of this together. We are going to go into our break for the morning. It's 10:50 now. Let's give you all a 10-minute break and come back at 11 o'clock. And we'll start off at 11 with a video of a role play from your peer-to-peer executives, and then give you all a chance to go into your own breakout rooms to practice the skills that we just talked about. So see you all at 11. So we're going to start with our role play section. So first we'll start by watching a video of Claire and Sonam doing a mock scripted role play for you all. And I'd like for you all, as you're watching, to just pick out some of the good things that they did throughout their video, and then perhaps some things that you'd like to see more of. in the video. So we'll kind of watch the video and debrief as a large group briefly, and then I'll set you up with the logistics for your small group role play so that you all have a chance to practice all the different skills and strategies we talked about earlier. So we'll go ahead and start with the video. I'm gonna get it started playing, and y'all help me out here. I hope you can hear the audio from it. If you cannot, please let me know. This will be a first for me, logistics-wise.
No audio.
Sure. All right. Aha, share sound. Got it. Sorry. Okay.
Hi, Sonam. I'm so glad you reached out to us. I understand you want to talk through school stress today.
Yeah, I would.
Okay, great. Since this is your first time using peer-to-peer, I'll tell you a little bit more about how it works. So this next hour is your time. Feel free to use as much or as little of it as you need. I'm here to talk through whatever's on your mind, and it's all confidential. What's said here stays here, unless, of course, you or someone else is in immediate danger, in which case I will reach out to professional support alongside you, but I'll walk you through the process and it won't be sprung on you surprisingly. Do you have any questions?
Nope, don't think so.
Okay, great. So I know school obviously is stressful for many reasons, but what's been going on with your school stress specifically?
Well, I've always had stress surrounding school, but this semester I'm in some really hard classes that I don't really enjoy. It feels draining, and it feels like I'm forcing myself to do all the assignments. It's making me really miserable. I spend all my time doing this, and I don't have any time for clubs or friends or doing things that really make me happy.
I'm sorry class feels so draining right now. I'd imagine it is extremely frustrating having your time taken up by things that aren't only hard, but are also not interesting or fulfilling to you. Remind me, what year are you this year?
I just started my sophomore year. Freshman year was okay. I mostly took some gen eds, but now classes are just getting harder. I'm not able to keep up with all of my classes and still make time for myself. It seems like there's so many tests and papers. It's all I ever do, and I try and survive from one to the other.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's hard to bounce from one assignment to the other without getting a break. I know you're not alone in feeling that way, but that still doesn't make it any less challenging. If you did have more time to do things you enjoyed, what kind of stuff would you do?
I used to love going on runs around campus, getting coffee with my friends, but I'm just so exhausted I can't do any of that right now.
Gotcha. Yeah, prioritizing ourselves and our needs is really hard in this environment. But ultimately, taking time for ourselves helps us be better people, even if that's not the message we're getting. And rest and enjoyment is productive in spite of people telling us it isn't. It seems like it's really hard for you to prioritize yourself as a sophomore.
Yeah, it is. I just wish there was more hours in the day.
I do too. A 26-hour day would feel about right. How are you planning your limited time and managing your schedule right now?
I use Google Calendars for all of my classes and club meetings.
Okay. What would it feel like to also create an event for a coffee date or a campus run? Like schedule yourself into the calendar.
I could try that, but I feel like I won't really follow through with it.
Why don't you think you'd follow through?
I don't know. School is just so much more important than me being able to squeeze in a run.
I understand feeling that way, and I hope you'll grow to know that yes, school is very important, but not more important than your overall well-being. Do you think you could try scheduling in a couple things for yourself this upcoming week?
Yeah, I can try.
Okay, that's great. If it would be helpful, I'd be happy to check in with you sometime late next week or the week after to see how it's going. And if it's not working, that's totally fine. We can talk through some other options and look through campus resources together.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'll meet with you sometime next week.
Great. You have my Google Voice number. Feel free to send me a text through there to set up a time or go back through our website if that's easier to remember. In the meantime, take really good care of yourself, and I hope this next week feels less overwhelming.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
All right. Thanks, Claire and Sonam, for letting us put you on the spot there with your video. I wanted to ask you all, what were some good skills and strategies that they used and that you noticed? You can put that in the chat or just unmute yourself. All right, Claire expressed empathy. That's good. Or open understanding and open-ended question balance. Yeah, taking a temperature is good. Reflection, not diminishing concerns, validation, telling her Sonam that she's not alone, getting to know her better overall. That's great. What were some things that you would like to see Claire as a peer responder do more of in her response to Sonam? Letting Sonam vent a little bit more. Problem solving part felt a little bit like a debate. I hear that. I saw Claire was like, but I think you did it gently, Claire, like kind of pushing Sonam a little bit, pushing back on her on the self-care pieces. Maybe asking about other supports that Sonam has in her life. Yeah, so just asking a little bit more about Sonam and using more of those probes. And understandably, good job, Claire. This was a very short 3-minute interaction, and hopefully you all will have more time with your peer responders. And so actually, I would like to give you all some short time now. We're going to head into breakout rooms. Let me pull up that slide with instructions. So I'm gonna put you all in breakout rooms of 3 people each. So there'll be 3 different roles. One person, I'll ask you to be the peer responder. So that would be analogous to Claire. So you're providing the support. And so respond as if you would in an actual call. The second role is to be the respondee or the peer student. So this is the person who's seeking support. So like Sonam was. And as you do that, I'd like to ask you all to just think in your head about a scenario in your own life or one of your friends' experiences for which you would have come to peer-to-peer for support. For example, I might role play in my own experience when I got a D in a class and was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with my life kind of situation. And I might role play that as a peer respondee student. And then the third person is to just observe and to note, just like we debrief now, 1 to 3 things that you think the responder does really well. And then if you all do that for just a couple minutes each, 3 to 5 minutes for each scenario, and then rotate roles. And then you'll have a chance to repeat so that each person gets a chance to be the responder. After that, we'll come back to the big group and then debrief all of that. And just be prepared to share out your observations with the larger group as we debrief. Are there any questions before I put you all and teleport you into your breakout rooms? All right. I'm going to put you in your breakout rooms, and then for timing's sake, I will try to remember to send you all a little notification whenever it's time to rotate roles. Pat has already pasted these instructions into the chat, so you have them for reference if needed. And then we'll be in the main room, so if you have any questions, you can always come back, or I think you can send us a chat message as well. All right, happy role playing. I hope you all had a good few minutes with each other. I also realized while you were there that this is the first time some of you may be meeting, so also good practice for building rapport very quickly among each other. All right, cool. We've got everyone back. Thanks for participating in those role plays, y'all. I know sometimes it can be a little challenging, and especially when you're meeting someone for the first time and talking about your own experiences. So big appreciation for you all doing that. As a debrief, I'd like to start with the same question that I asked you earlier about Claire and Sonam's video, which is, what were some good things that you all observed your peer responder doing or saying during your role plays? Feel free again to just unmute yourself, raise your hand, or put things in the chat. Yes, Joseph?
Yeah, I felt like for my group, a lot of the one of the situations was that like we couldn't really do anything. It was with a blown out tires. So our responder was really effective in just being genuine and like with an apology like that. There's not much we can do in that scenario, but just being like there, recognizing it's a stressful time. I think that was one of the best things that we did in our breakout group.
Thanks, Joseph. I'm seeing also in some other breakout groups, folks highlighting similarly a lot of support and validation and empathy. Other groups, were there good things that y'all noticed that your peer responders said or did during your conversations?
Yeah, they did a good job of reflecting it back, making sure that, you know, everyone or the respondee kind of felt listened to and validated, and then also asking open-ended questions to dig deeper and not letting them get away, but like making sure to dig deeper and understanding what they're saying.
That's awesome. Christopher, if you remember, could you share a couple of the phrases you might have remembered them saying in those probes or reflections?
Yeah. Oh God, maybe they know what they said. I don't know. I'll think on it. But yeah.
No worries. If it comes to you, let us know. Were there other folks who had peer responders do a good job of reflections? And if you remember what they said, could you share that with the group? What phrases they used? Or as Christopher said, if you remember what you said, you can also check. Landon.
Something that Mira did really well was she would use Tiosa's language before asking an open-ended question. So reflecting using a lot of the words that Tiosa was offering to Mira. And so I found that super effective because she for sure knew that she was listening by using the things that she was saying in the first place.
That's a great point. And, you know, one of the things that, you know, in other trainings that we talked about, nonverbal communication and cues and, you know, mirroring body language and mirroring things like that in a virtual space, mirroring the language is a perfect way of doing that. That's a great example.
Landon, was that Landon that mentioned that?
Yes.
And you said Mira did a good job of that?
Yes.
So let me ask a question of Mira. A tricky thing when you're using people's words back is to use it in a way that sounds engaged and empathic rather than just sort of rote repeating what they said to you. How did you do that?
I'll be honest, it was kind of a subconscious thing. I think when my friends talk to me, like I'm usually the person people go to for like advice, and I think I've just like gained that skill over time because I wasn't really noticing it as I was saying it back. But I think when you genuinely are listening, it kind of just comes. And I feel like when people ask for advice, if you're just listening to respond or listening to come up with something to like be like, oh, just do this, then it doesn't come out as empathetic. Versus when you're actually listening to be like, oh, I see where you're coming from.
I'm not sure how to do it, but it seems to me that one bit of that is paying attention to what the feeling is rather than just the description of what happened.
Yeah, I agree.
Bobby, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, my group did a really good job, like, allowing the respondee to, like, guide the conversation and not really, like, if we were, like, moving on to problem solving or anything like that, it was always, like, if you're ready, like, if you're comfortable with this. And I felt like that made, like, the conversations feel much less like an interrogation or some sort of, like, it really just felt like it was on the respondee, like it was their, you know, space. So that was great.
That's awesome. So you're letting the respondee really drive where they want to go with it, as well as letting them feel, I think, probably more agency in the situation. When we were in the main room, while y'all were in the breakout rooms, I heard that there was a question that was really good, and I want to give some attention to that. Sonam, I think you were in that room. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so that question was referring to, what do we do as peer responders if we feel like maybe we might have overstepped a bound, or maybe the peer feels uncomfortable with the question that we asked, whether like we kind of maybe hit too sensitive, or maybe they just don't want to talk about that. So how do we kind of retract or kind of move on, or show that this is still a safe space and that they can still trust us? And so I think, one thing I had seen in that group, and also something that I have done in my own personal experience, is just really the same thing that they're doing, is being vulnerable, right? So just being vulnerable and saying, hey, I'm sorry if you don't want to talk about that, that's completely all right. Maybe we can revisit that, or we can move on and talk about something else that might be on your mind. But this is just like it is, we're peers, right, with each other. And so being able to be okay to make those mistakes and knowing that we're not going to get it right always is really important. But it's really more about the recovery and like how you're able to just show the peer that I'm still here for you, and I'm sorry if I overstepped a bound. That was never my intention, kind of thing. So I think that's really important. And that can be for any sorts of things. It can be about lived experiences. It can be cultural experiences. It can be just talking about a friend, so that can really happen in any situation.
I agree. I think that's a great way to express it. Just own up to it in the moment and just say, oh, I apologize. And then to let them decide if they want to move on, kind of, Bobby, like you were saying earlier, letting the respondee drive a little bit. Would anyone else approach that a little differently in that situation?
Just picking up on Sonam's use of the word vulnerability. Before apology, just, oh my goodness, I should have realized that we're probably not ready to go there. I'm sorry for having asked you to talk more about that, or something like that. So beginning by just an honest expression of your own feeling that you stepped in it.
And Ed, I think you bring up also a good reminder that, and you all saw this in Claire's video when she was the responder, that you can offer opportunities for peers to follow up with you in a subsequent conversation. And so over time, you may be able to build rapport and trust, so that perhaps that off limits conversation in call number 1 is no longer so off limits later on as you build that supportive relationship with them. Alternatively, someone could go back to the peer website and say, oh, I'd rather talk to someone else about this. And that's also okay. That is just a personal preference on the student's part, right? And that doesn't necessarily respond. That's not like shouldn't be a personal offense to you. Although I know sometimes that's hard for me to process a little bit, so.
Yeah, in other peer support programs that we've worked with, it's very common for the peer supporters to pass the clients off on to other people. If there's a specific topic that another person they know has a lot of experience with, they would say, hey, there's another person I work with who knows a lot about this. You should definitely go talk to them about it. And it might be just a one-off conversation. They come back to you as their main person, so to speak. Or it could just be like, yeah, if you like talking to them more, that's great. But I think that's part of the better you guys know each other and know what your areas are that you're most comfortable with, the better you can, give a path to people that you're working with.
Correct. And hopefully you all will have more opportunities to talk to each other and learn more about each other so that you can exercise that resource that Pat was just talking about. Before we move on to some of those program particulars and I hand it off to the peer-to-peer exec team to present, did anyone else have any final questions that might have come up during your role plays or comments that you wanted to share with the large group? Ed?
Yeah, I just want to go back to where Joseph got us started. And I think, Joseph, you mentioned, was it a flat tire? There was some problem that wasn't solvable. And you all are good at problem solving. So your natural tendency in these situations is to feel that you have to solve the problem. You know, if they say the problem is that Kevin Guskowitz is chancellor at UNC, you're going to feel, what can I do about Kevin Guskowitz? Well, you know, the answer is not much. And that's just among us. But you know, it's interesting. So you're going to feel on the defensive. You're going to feel like, oh, I should be able to help this. And just talking about the fact that there ain't no solution can be very reassuring and rapport building with the person, because to some extent they're feeling also, I ought to be able to solve this problem. And you're sharing that this is crappy, but we can't fix this, can be very supportive in a funny, paradoxical way. So I really appreciated your kicking us off with that example. I don't know if you want to expand on that at all.
Yeah, so in that situation, it was Bobby and Christina, but I thought that, yeah, the first thing was an apology and like, just like awareness that that's a really tough situation. And even though that it might not be the only thing going on, that just being there and saying like, oh, I'm sorry, like that was like, that's obviously something really scary. Or even offering like, oh, I've had my own, you know, flat tire, or I've had a tire blowout, like that can also be helpful to relate. So I think those strategies would be best for that kind of scenario.
All right, thanks y'all. I hope that you continue using these role plays as examples or ideas of things that you can say and pick up different strategies from each other. And then
Samantha,
yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm just meditating a bit on what Joseph said. I think what this illustrates is it dramatizes perhaps that the really key bedrock ingredient in peer support is the discussion and the exchange, not the solution. Thanks, Joseph.
I can say I thought Bobby did a great job wrapping it up too, because I ended up just being like, I didn't want to complain to my roommate about this or call my mom and stress her out about it. And Bobby did a great job of being like, well, you can tell me you can keep going and keep it. He just made it a very open space to talk about like, this just sucks and it's hard.
It just sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes the solution is, this just sucks.
All right. I think we're gonna move on. Okay. I believe I am sending it to Toby next. Is that right?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name's Toby. I'm one of the exec members, and we're just going to be talking about, I guess, how we work as a program now. Next slide, please. So the next few slides are just getting into the weeds of how we work. So when a peer respondee requests us online, we're notified via the website, which I think you've all seen. One of the four of us on exec will reach out with the peer responder who was asked for, and you guys will have a 48-hour time window to reach out to the peer responder or the peer respondee and update our Google Sheet, which we can show you guys right here in the image. Yeah, so basically your name will be here, and in the red is like that they never got back to you. Green is that they did get back to you, and yellow is they did get out to you or you're waiting for them. And with the meetings, they're going to be via text, phone call, Zoom, or email. It's up to you, honestly. And when you're going to be using Zoom or phone call or text, we would prefer you guys use a Google number, which we will show you guys how to set up in another document. And yeah, next slide.
Yeah, so after you've had your call or your conversation with your peer, these are just some of the things that we hope that you do post-conversation. So the first thing is to make sure that you send your peer the post-call survey. This can be found on the peer-to-peer email drive, which we will be sharing with you guys once you're fully onboarded. And this form will just ask them who they spoke to, how long the conversation was, if they were satisfied with the conversation, and any things they might want to change, or if they plan on using peer-to-peer again. The next point is weekly check-ins. So just depending on whether the peer requests it or not, or when you offer it, they decline or accept, you may reach out to them again in the next week or the following weeks to make sure they're doing okay. This might include offering more advice on their situation and just checking to see if they made any improvements based on the first conversation you had. And then this last point is extremely important. We just ask that you make sure you take care of yourself after each conversation. This may be reaching out to one of us exec members or another peer responder to just debrief on the conversation that you had. And this also might just mean taking care of yourself and engaging in self-care exercises like taking a shower, going for a walk, reading a book, just whatever helps you de-stress and make sure that you're okay. Next slide. So this leads to our next point, prioritizing you and your mental health. So making sure that you stay aware of your commitments and your availability within any given week is extremely important. So please make sure that you're in the right headspace and the mindset to talk to others and listen to other people's problems or situations. You can always shoot us a small text or a message just telling us like, hey, this week I'm not available, but I'll be free maybe, or I'll be able to take another peer like next week. Just having that open conversation with us is something that we really want to emphasize. Being able to be there for others always means being there for yourself first. So if you're not feeling okay, making sure to go through your self-care exercises is really important. And we will have a peer responder group me where we'll be checking in with you guys weekly or bi-weekly just to make sure that everyone's doing okay. So we really want to encourage in that group chat you guys giving us feedback. So what's working for you and your peers and what's not. Just, yeah, always having that conversation. Next slide.
While a lot of our calls are about like our personal life or school, there's a possibility of a crisis. Next slide, please. So in this section, we're just going to highlight what makes up a crisis, how to respond to them, and how to reach out to us, Sam, Pat, Ed, or the exec team. And we just want to make sure that you all have the right resources and tools available to respond properly. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so this is just a brief overview of our general crisis protocol. We want to emphasize that at the beginning of every call, you tell the peer, like, this call is going to be kept between the two of us. It's a private conversation, but if they do request to remain anonymous, please make sure that you just ask them for a callback number or another way to contact them in any case that like an emergency or just like a problem arises, that you can have a way to contact them if the call ends or anything like that. So just explicitly having that statement said at the beginning of your call is extremely important. Next slide. And so, yeah, just to define terms around suicide, because you may come across a conversation where it's mentioned, suicidality is the risk of suicide that's usually indicated by suicidal ideation or intent, especially as evident in the presence of a well-elaborated suicidal plan. Ideation is thoughts about or preoccupation with killing oneself. A plan is a plan to end one's life, and intent is the seriousness or intensity of the person's wish to terminate his or her life. So really looking at your conversations and making sure you pick up on hints or red flags is extremely important. Next slide.
All right, so this is our general crisis protocol. And like Toby said in the chat, don't feel like you need to memorize this. We'll definitely have these posted so you can look back at them for easy reference. But the first thing is just to assess, is this a crisis? Is this just a conversation? Like kind of what's going on here? And so if the caller does mention suicide, then the next slide will show you the suicide risk protocol. And it should be pretty easy to follow, but if you ever have any questions or something comes up that you're not sure about, please let us know or let Ed or Samantha or Pat know. And so if they don't mention suicide, but you still think there might be a crisis, then, you got to think about, is the crisis life-threatening or is this like a non-life-threatening crisis? And then you'd proceed differently. Next slide. Okay, so this is our suicide risk protocol. So I'll just start at the first one and kind of go through it. So in the past week, have you had any thoughts about wishing you were dead or taking your own life, or that things may be better if you did? And so if no, then, we'll follow up with them and, encourage them to maybe talk to a mental health provider. And it's always like a great option to just offer, and I have a list of resources I can share with you guys as well, but offer like the suicide prevention line, the CAPS line, just make sure that they have those available just in case, even if suicide is not like an immediate threat. So if yes, like they have been having these thoughts, you're going to ask them both, like, have you had these thoughts today? And have you had any thoughts about how you might harm or kill yourself? And that's really getting at, is there like a plan in place? Because that's definitely a red flag that we want to watch out for, because that's pretty serious. So if not, again, we'll refer them back to the suicide lifeline and we'll remind them of a safety plan. And I'm happy to go over safety plans with you guys. We have more resources that we'll email out about that. And then we'll follow up with them as well, like in 24 to 48 hours, and just let them know that we're there for them and ready to follow up. So if yes, they have had either of those thoughts, either 2 or 3, ask them if they're planning to carry out a plan in the next 24 hours. And that's important to address like this urgency and see kind of where their head is with this. And then if they answer yes, like, are they going to carry this out now? And they say yes to that, then we do need to act really quickly and call emergency services. So we'll urge them to go to 911 or emergency care. And it's really important. I know that peer-to-peer, which is a little bit of a hurdle, one of the really good things about our program is we are virtual, so it makes it more accessible, but we do want to see if there's someone that we can get to be with them. We don't want anyone to be alone in this situation. So if there's someone you can get to sit with them, that would be really helpful. And then sometimes peers might refuse, which is okay, and we can handle that. But that's why what Michelle said, like, we'll get a callback number. Then if they refuse to like seek help themselves, then we can reach out to 911, or if it seems like a little bit less emergent, like the Dean of Students office, you can do a wellness check. But that's why it's like really important to have that information. And so then backtracking a little bit, I know I went straight to through the yeses, but if they say no to the plan within 24 hours, then I think it's good to, again, like the Suicide Lifeline is a great resource. Like we can always emphasize that. And then trying to get them to think about things that have worked for them in the past. Unfortunately, if someone's having thoughts of suicide, it probably isn't the first time that they've had those thoughts. And so asking them, what has worked for you in the past? Like, what's good for you? How can I support you in this? And just referring to mental health providers is always a good option as well. And I know a lot of you are psych majors, I would assume. And so I'm sure you're aware of this, but there's quite a bit of research that like with suicide and suicidality, like talking about it and asking them direct questions about it usually isn't triggering. And so it's better just to ask and be sure and really confirm that than to like avoid it. So hopefully, like, I know it's an awkward thing to talk about, but know that, you know, by asking about it directly and by being really like resourceful and objective with them, you probably are helping and you're not going to push them towards doing something. Next slide. All right, and this is our general crisis protocol like we went over earlier. And again, like we've echoed at the beginning of the call, we'll get that callback number and then we'll say, you know, this is anonymous, but if there is, you know, a danger to yourself or someone else, like we're gonna help you walk through these resources and walk through this crisis protocol. And all this will be posted for you guys. All right, next slide.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, that was a great breakdown. So this slide is just going to focus on these mental health events that might happen. So while there may be calls that are probably casual, there might be a need for immediate action or intervention. So this slide just points out the characteristics of a possibly life-threatening crisis. And I think, or identifying these events is really important to protecting others and especially themselves. Next slide.
So now we're going to talk about some of the non-life-threatening crises. And so these are, it's really important to understand the distinction, although it's really hard to understand the distinction between life-threatening and non-life-threatening, especially when you're on a call. And like we've reiterated, if you're ever unsure, just call or, you know, text any one of the exec members. And, you know, if none of us respond, Dr. Fisher and Samantha and Pat have all given their information out as well. So we always think it's better safe to be sorry than sorry. So when it comes to non-life-threatening crises, so if a caller or a peer has had thoughts about suicide, but no intention or plans to carry it out, then we consider this to be a non-life-threatening crisis. Suicide ideation is something that is, you know, talked about in many college students and many individuals. And so it's a really nuanced distinction between, you know, talking about suicide, but having that plan or those intentions that Claire really talked about. If a caller has harmed themselves or others in the past, that's also a non-life-threatening crisis. But obviously, if it's immediate, if it's currently happening or in the future, that will be a life-threatening crisis. Caller feels scared or unsafe, but can't identify the imminent threat. So this is more like the intangible. They're unable to say what it is. And if a caller is unable to care for themselves. And lastly, the caller cannot resolve the situation with skills or resources available. And if there's anything of a criminal activity that occurred in the past. So a lot of these, just because we are deeming them as non-life-threatening crises does not mean that we're saying that they don't need the support or they don't need help. It just means that in terms of our crisis protocol, the way the structure goes about who to call, when to call, how to follow up is just a little bit different. So I just want to reiterate and emphasize that just because it's a non-life-threatening crisis does not mean it's not a crisis and that it's not something that needs attention. Next slide. So talking about this life-threatening crisis protocol, things that are non-suicidal. So like we said, we want to always find a callback number or some way to locate the individual. And so the best way is having a cell number. And this is going to be really important because lately we've been getting a lot of anonymous callers. So, you know, right in the very beginning, you just want to establish that idea. This can be kind of hard if it's via email. And that's something we've had in the past where we've had a crisis, but it's via email, but we were able to kind of navigate that situation as well. And so if that happens, like I said, feel free to contact any one of us. So if you're unable to obtain the number of the person or the location of the individual, remind the peer of their safety plan, and ask them if there is someone who can support them or who can be with a caller, and then direct them to 911. On the other hand, if you do have the address of the caller and it's in the same state as you, you can direct that call to 911, but if they refuse, you should call 911 on their behalf. And so this can be something that's really hard as a peer responder, and this is where, you know, it becomes really difficult, and that's why we're here to support you. If there is ever a crisis, you know, the first thing should always be to contact peer-to-peer so that we can be there to support you through these steps. And then, you know, at the end of the day, both scenarios is confirming the person's phone number and let them know that you will call them back in 30 minutes, and then reporting that crisis incident to peer-to-peer exec for review. Many a times, you know, when you're in the moment, it's hard to inform us and things like that, which is why we are having this training and trust your judgment in doing what's right. But, you know, ideally we would love to be there to support you through this process if it ever arises. But we understand if you go through and then you report back to us at the end, we'll have a long debrief with you afterwards. Next slide. And so lastly, the non-threatening or non-life-threatening crisis protocol. So encourage the person to once again review their safety plan, use other resources, talk to mental health providers, talk to primary care providers, go to urgent care. So one really key thing about peer-to-peer, and we pride ourselves on, is we understand when it's beyond the depths of what we're able to do as peer responders. So we also are in very good communication with different entities on campus, outside of campus. And so being a referral source or being somebody that we can guide and help students get to other resources is something that's really important to us. And so these are really important to emphasize also in your calls, that there are other resources besides peer-to-peer, and besides, if let's say they don't want to go to CAPS or they don't have affordability of providing or having a mental health provider. Those are all things that peer-to-peer is equipped to helping students reach and connect with. Lastly, confirming the person's phone number and informing them that you'll call them back within 7 days. So giving them that space, but also recognizing that you'll have that follow-up period. And then, as always, reporting that incident to peer-to-peer for review. Next slide.
All right. So some of our key resources, 911, obviously, and also the UNC like emergency room. They're great just if there's suicidality or some emergency, for the peer not to be alone, even if they just go and sit. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and like Samantha said, you know, if you want to check out their website, that would be great, because they also have, you know, some Spanish lines or non-hearing lines, just to make sure that we can make that accessible for everyone and direct them to the right line for them. CAPS also has a line, even if they're like off hours, which is good, and they're pretty good about referring. And then ombuds as well, if you want to check out their website, that's a great resource for us to use too. Next slide.
Claire, can I just add an additional comment here?
Oh yeah, go for it.
With some of these resources, I just want to clarify and kind of acknowledge that the emergency resources, so 911, local emergency department, and law enforcement, the contacting those resources and having someone or taking someone to the emergency department could have ramifications for them, whether that's legal or mental health related. Like it can be, for some people, traumatizing to go to the emergency department. It can be a little bit busy and loud for some folks and might not be the best place for them. So knowing like what, you know, identifying whether or not someone needs to go to those resources is really important. And just realizing that, like, if you, as much as you can, try to be there for your peer if you do have to engage with those emergency services, to support them through that experience as well. And then you're right, Claire, the CAPS number, I'm sorry, I didn't write it in here, but it is a 24/7 line that I'm you all have probably heard about. And then the Ombuds office, I will just add that that's an office that doesn't always get a lot of airplay, but they are there to be a confidential source of helping you navigate all the different things that are happening at the university and perhaps different resources that you might engage with. And so they're a really great office, and I believe they're operating both in person and virtually right now. So you can contact them and speak with an ombud.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that, Samantha. She brings up a great point with the emergency room. You know, that's not a fun thing to go do. And that's hard for a lot of people. And so being really open with them and being like, hey, we're going to walk you through this and you're not doing this by yourself. And just being really clear about it and not like springing it on them is really important as well.
Thanks. All right, so back to y'all for a number of other resources.
Okay, yeah, so diversity, equity, and inclusion resources. So there's the diversity.unc.edu. And these are great websites, even if you guys want to go through the slides and just click on them and check them out before recommending them to peers, I think that would be awesome. The graduate school diversity and student services, excuse me, because we do with peer-to-peer, as you all know, we talk to undergraduate and graduate students. And I know most of you are undergrads, but also being really aware that, you know, we do have this graduate student population as well. And then CAPS, like Samantha said, we have the 24/7 line. And then there's also for non-fee paying students. We've definitely had a few calls where that's been like financially has been a problem. So sending them that email as well is really great. So they can check that out and see like what their options are, because I know with, you know, insurance and fees and all like that all gets kind of complicated and convoluted. So that's important for them to check out. Next slide, sorry. All right, and then well-being resources, student wellness, CAPS, us, peer-to-peer, Dean of Students. I mentioned this briefly earlier during the safety planning, but the Dean of Students office, if there is a crisis, we can have them do, which again is more of like a last resort thing. Like we probably wouldn't do this unless we had to. We can have them do a wellness check on the student, and that would be for like a less emergent crisis. For UNC employees, we have a link for that as well. And then like Samantha said, Ombuds, and then Peers for Progress, which is the great organization that they're a part of. Next slide. And then community resources, 911, suicide prevention hotline. Oh, Samantha, great. Like she's listed some of the subsets of that. There's also an NC helpline, which is really helpful. And then Hope for Healers. You know, we do have grad students and students who are working in the healthcare field, which can obviously bring up a lot of stressors of its own. So that's also a really important line to be aware of. Next slide.
One thing I will also add on that is, you know, Dr. Fisher mentioned at the very beginning, we're not the only peer support organization on campus. We are a one-on-one, but sometimes people might want group resources. And so Student Wellness Network is one, Tar Heel Navigators is another, and CAPS has a lot of group kind of group therapy or group resources as well if people want to support groups. So just want to plug those in as well.
And just really quickly before we move forward, do any of you guys have any questions about how peer-to-peer works as a program, or like any of those things that we mentioned in the earlier slides? If you have any, you can like raise your hand or pop it in the chat. But yeah.
Also a kind of learn on the job kind of situation. And so once you get peer responders, we'll walk you through this again and link you to all those. So don't worry about that. But yeah, feel free to type any questions in the chat or raise your hand.
And as y'all are thinking of your questions, I was just double checking on the website. I know we just talked a lot about crisis response, and I think that the exec team has been really thorough in wanting to give you all resources. for if that situation ever arises. But on the website, when someone does request a peer, they are initially sent, if they are experiencing a crisis, to the suicide prevention hotline, lifeline, excuse me, or perhaps to seek care somewhere else. And so hopefully that helps a little bit with you all not having to deal so much with crises, but it's still really important for you all to be able to identify what a crisis might look like and how that's defined and how you might respond, because that might come up for someone over time as well. Bobby, you had your hand up.
Yes. So I don't know, this is sort of like a what if situation that I don't know will happen, but if we like schedule a time to talk with a peer or something and like some crisis comes up like with us and we're not able to make that, would you rather us like just sort of like reschedule or do something, or like try to like work with another peer to like shift to their with? How do you all usually handle that?
I was going to say that if something does happen to you, I would reach out to one of us on exec, and from then we can delegate that task to another available individual.
Michelle,
Oh, sorry,
go
I was also going. I just thought of a new thing as well. I would also probably let them know that you might not be able to reach out to them because they might be banking on you, and that just probably say that, oh, there's going to be another individual who's going to reach out to you.
I do have one quick question. I imagine that a lot of the students that will be reaching out to or who will be reaching out to us are in the North Carolina area. If like, for example, I am here in Virginia, so I'm not in state. If the situation were to arise where the what's the word, flow chart indicates I should call 911 in case of a crisis, would that, and they are in North Carolina, would that be something that would be able to be addressed in the debrief, or am I supposed to be? I'm just curious as to how that would work out.
I guess in that situation, since all four of us exec members are in North Carolina, you could either call or text one of us to contact 911 for you. So you just provide us with the peer respondees address and like any relevant information about them, and we can do that for you.
All right, thank you.
And another just quick note, and we actually have done this before, but we're happy to like, you can merge us in on the call. And if you just, if there is a safety concern, just like keeping them on the phone as long as you can, and letting us know, and then we can reach out to 911 or whoever we need to.
Bobby?
Yeah, sorry, I have one more clarification question. Should we always start off our conversations with asking for a callback number, or is that only in like the event that we perceive some sort of crisis scenario?
I think it's always good just to start off every conversation with just telling them about how the conversation is going to work, and also just clarifying like, hey, just in case this call drops out or we need to contact you again for whatever reason, can you let me know what is the best way to contact you? And then, yeah, I think for every conversation, that's good.
And I think during the flow chart, it said like, if anonymous, please try to confirm number. But it's also, as you said, Michelle, just a good practice to confirm the number, even if it's not an anonymous person, just to make sure they didn't like put in a false number or that it wasn't mistyped. And so you've got all that information confirmed, ready to go. Were there any other questions? These are all really good questions, y'all. Good job. Okay, with that, I'm gonna send it back to Pat for our next section on picture topics.
All right, we are getting ready to close out this training. So let's end it by zooming out to some bigger picture topics, and we were getting into the nitty-gritty of the protocols, and those are really important. But now we have 10 minutes to talk about structural racism. to end this call today. So big picture topics. Next slide. Let's start talking about environmental stressors. So what are the things in people's environment that might come up, right? Students might be calling with in relation to stressors they're experiencing in school, workload, deadlines, personal issues. But after maybe a couple of calls, you might find out that there's additional stressors in the environment that are impacting their mental well-being. And things that we got to be sensitive to are racism, sexism, ableism, homophobia, COVID-19, obviously, current events, regional, national, international, university dynamics, department dynamics, concerns about their finances, their careers, isolation, loneliness, climate change is definitely a big one. And being a good peer responder means that you're attentive and responsive to these issues if they come up. The student might come to peer-to-peer, based on and choose a peer responder based on some shared identity. Obviously, as a student, that's your first shared identity. But maybe they read your profile, saw your picture, and felt like they could connect with you in an initial way. But then you find out that there's these other stressors and there's other parts of their identities that are causing stress as well. So definitely got to be prepared if these types of conversations come up, and sometimes very uncomfortable for folks when they do come up unexpectedly. And we want to call out racism as an important issue, especially since the beginning of the pandemic, that deserves special attention. And we need to believe and validate the experiences of BIPOC folks by their peer responders, and also for non-Black peer responders to be aware of our positionality and understand how our actions could negatively affect others, especially in the context of UNC Chapel Hill as an institution which has its own history with racism. Our experiences with racism in the university are quite different based on where we are. I think for example, we're based in the Gilling School of Public Health, and they're very active and have a very good track record in addressing racism. But we understand that that's not the case in a lot of other areas on campus, and a student might be thrown into a situation where there's not that type of awareness in their interactions. So there are some additional resources for understanding racism better and trainings. We can definitely share those out afterwards since our time is limited. I'll just mention them very briefly. The Gillings Inclusive Excellence Training, Racial Equity Institute trainings, and building racial equity trainings, just by name. But if you want to learn more about those, we can send out those links to you after the training. This training. Next slide, please.
Pat, can I just comment on what you said about being responsive to issues pertinent to a peer, and how like someone might choose you based on some shared lived experience or identity to begin with, but perhaps something comes up later that's stressing them out. And earlier, I know we had a discussion after the role play about, if you kind of step in it or you're in a situation that you can't quite relate to. I think I just want to bring up the shared resource that you all have, which is each other, and to talk to each other about, what are your experiences as peer responders? Like, what conversations are you having? What experiences do you all have in your own life and that you might be able to share? And how might you be able to leverage each other as resources? Perhaps you refer the peer to have a conversation with both of you. Perhaps they want to talk to the other person alone about something that they might have a better experience or expertise in. Those kinds of things are helpful to you all. Just wanted to make sure that we remembered that from our earlier conversation.
Thanks, Samantha.
Yeah, I just want to add a dimension here. We all are trying our very best to be as sensitive to other folks and their experiences as we can, but be aware that something may come at you that you experience as out of left field, and you may not immediately understand that this is really stressful to the person. So be aware of that potential that you have to not grasp how something is stressful to someone if it seems peripheral or environmental or whatever. I think we've all learned over the last couple of years to honor each other's experiences, and but it still sometimes is hard to do that. So be sensitive to that.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. And if I can just bring up a quick example of a common situation which I find challenging, and other folks might as well, is if someone is maybe anti-vaccine, COVID vaccine, or vaccine hesitant, you really have to really work hard to practice empathy in those situations, because for us working in public health, there's it's definitely important to us, and addressing kind of somebody's personal concerns is very important to them. The issue of taking the vaccine, but to be empathetic to that perspective, though it's so different from ours, and not trying to impose our viewpoints all the time. That's, I think, just an example of an environmental stressor, which might not fit with our view of reality, but we have to work through.
Yep.
Next slide, Samantha. This slide is about yourself and taking care of yourself as a peer responder. You can't pour from an empty cup. So with respect to the mental health crisis in higher education and how strained mental health services are on campus, you might feel that being a peer responder takes on additional importance. And then, by taking on this role, there's now this weight on your shoulders to do mental health care for your fellow student community. But I think it's really important to be realistic, thinking ahead about your course load, your other obligations, how you're going to balance this role of being a peer responder with your overall, student experience. And be realistic, is this going to be a responsibility that becomes a chore? It should be something that's really rewarding, and maybe a break from typical schoolwork and stuff. But when it becomes something like that, let's address it, head on. And in mental health, it's not unusual for counselors and people who deliver mental health services to also be consumers of care. People who do therapy also get therapy from other licensed counselors. So, and there's nothing stopping you from using peer-to-peer from a student perspective. You might even consider doing that at the start to experience, the service from a student's perspective, and then get some pointers and learn some tips from peer responders who have already been doing it. Next slide. And so what's the reason that we're doing all of this on campus? Why are we promoting peer support at UNC Chapel Hill? And what we're trying to do is to promote this culture of mutuality on campus, counter to the wider cultural emphasis on individual achievement, and this line of rugged individualism that we're taught from early childhood, that solutions to our problems are within ourselves, and if we just apply ourselves and grow personally, we can deal with everything on our own. But that's not the environment we want to create on campus. We want to create a place where people can ask for help and rely on each other, and not be ashamed to ask for help when they need it. So we think that our community would be much better off if we can put aside our egos not feel ashamed to ask for help, and not be so worried about how we're perceived by others for help-seeking behavior. And we're here for you. The peer-to-peer executive team is here for you. There's a lot of people who are here for you as a peer responder, and we want to promote that within this organization so we can promote it outside of our organization. And with that, I will send it off to Samantha to close us out, or Ed? Ed.
So tremendous 2.5 hours. I always say that I've been thinking about these issues for over 50 years, but every time I participate in or listen to a session like this, I learn something new. The idea of how talking about the fact that we can't do anything about something can be enhancing of the relationship and enhancing of the support is something that I'd never quite gotten before. So I want to thank Joseph for that. And I think, I'm sorry, I think her name was Mia. Mira. And I also just want to make another little emphasis on the culture of mutuality. The issue is not that a culture of mutuality is antithetical to achievement. The issue is that achievement actually is enhanced in a culture of mutuality, that people do better, groups do better, organizations do better when we're all working together and supporting each other. So that the culture of mutuality serves the objectives of the university, of enhancing North Carolina, and it serves the objectives of each of us here, and enhancing our own lives, the contributions we make to the world, etc. But I just want to thank you, and thank you for your attention. Thank you for participating in peer-to-peer. It's a terrific group. It's been really one of the most exciting things to develop at UNC over the last 1.5 years. I hope you all feel, not only today, but with your introduction to peer-to-peer and your work going forward, I hope you feel a really wonderful sense of engaging in, giving yourself to, at times extending yourself for something really worthwhile that will not only be satisfying to yourselves, but helpful to many of your classmates, peers, and others in the university. So thank you again. And did I leave anything out, Samantha? Oh, take the questionnaire.
Yeah, Toby sent the link to our post training survey, and like he said, it's just helpful for us to figure out and hear your feedback on what has been helpful or less helpful in this training for the next group of peer supporters and others across campus, as we do this training similarly with other groups. And also, Toby did share the slide deck with you all as a file in the beginning of the training. However, I want to take some of your comments that you all had and make sure we add those back into the notes of the slides and capture any additions. So we'll make sure there's another set of slides that make it to you if you didn't take notes, and that's totally fine. And yeah, that's all from us. Peer-to-peer exec team.
Yeah, so just going to talk about next steps. So you all are trained. We'll be adding your bios to our website, and we'll be adding you to the form. So feel free to follow our social media account. We will be, I think especially during midterm season, we get a lot of individuals who reach out for stress and things like that. So we also understand that it is midterm season or final season for all of us. So only take on what you feel like you can take on and what you can. We will try and distribute, amongst the rest of the peer responders. So we'll be having, a couple of posts, just kind of feel free to share those in whatever space you feel like sharing that, peer-to-peer is a resource for individuals. And we were really excited. And once again, thank you for joining, and looking forward to a great rest of our semester and next semester and the future semesters. So with that, I will give you back the rest of your Sunday afternoon. And please do fill out the post survey. Thank you all for coming.